with any law in India, there are two components to it. One would be what's written in the book, and the other would be what the judge interprets of that law. Similarly, with sedition, which is actually a 150-year-old law in the Indian Penal Code under Section 124A. Now, the definition of sedition under 124A says that anybody who expresses themselves in a way where it excites disaffection towards the government would be punished under sedition. However, if there is criticism against the government by lawful means, that's not sedition. Now, this is what the law says on the books. The Supreme Court in 1962, in Kedarnath Singh versus the Union of India, added a further limitation to our understanding of sedition, which can only be invoked in cases where there is incitement to violence or somebody intends to cause violence or public order or law and order problems. One of the reasons the Supreme Court had to intervene in this way and put across this second limitation is that there were many people who were being charged with sedition, even though their criticisms were lawful and their comments against the government were lawful. So today, the understanding of sedition is still what Section 124A says, combined with what the Supreme Court has said, which is that if there is incitement to violence, only then can that expression be seditious expression.
What I find fascinating about the sedition law in itself is the very origins of the law. So here is clearly a law which was designed to contain India's freedom struggle back in the late 19th century, when the freedom struggle after the First War of Independence was just taking off. And that's when this law was designed, because the colonial masters realized that there were people who were able to create a sense of dissatisfaction about the colonial state in India, interestingly, at that point it was not as much the violence, or it was not as much the violent act against the British that the British were really concerned about. It was the spread of dissatisfaction. It was the spread of this sort of hatred and this sort of contempt for the British state, which was the task that Indian freedom fighters were doing very well. And that is essentially what the law was supposed to attack. So if you read the law, as Lubeti has said, it really looks at anyone who's creating dissatisfaction with the elected state, with the state. Now, and then see the kind of people who were then targeted. There was Abul Kalam Azad, there was Lokmanya Tilak, there was Veer Savarkar. Now, these were all people who had a very big role to play in India's freedom struggle, and these were the people who were violating the sedition law. And that in itself tells you why it's so problematic for this law to then be inherited into a modern independent India and be used by the government and by the elected state against its people, against the people who are voting, against the people who are participating in the democratic process to elect that government.
One of the things that we found in our research, which we did in a period between 2010 and 2020, so slightly more contemporary, perhaps that people can relate to a little better, is that the meaning of sedition clearly changes depending on which government is in power, both at the center and the state. Now, of course, in a 150-year history of sedition, it's evident that this would be the case. However, our findings clearly sort of bring out the different events in the last 10 years that triggered many cases of sedition filed against ordinary Indians who were protesting lawfully. One of them in 2011, under the then UPA-2 Congress government, was hundreds of cases of sedition filed against people in Tamil Nadu who were protesting the construction of a nuclear plant. In more recent times, in the last 3 years, what we've seen under this government is the anti-CAA protests, where again, hundreds of people were charged under sedition for simply protesting against the anti-CA laws. But what we're also seeing is that its meaning changes depending on who's in power, and combined with the criminal process is really is quite a lethal cocktail for all of us living in the country who want to speak up against what we think is wrong or who want to criticize the government. Because of course we will be afraid of something happening to us, that we might be arrested, and then of course our whole lives will sort of be affected by that. Not to mention that there is the added label of being called an anti-national or a Deshdrohi.
So the database, that Lubyathi and a bunch of other excellent researchers have prepared indicates that people who are seen to be critics of the establishment, people who are seen to be dissenting, and dissent, remember, is an extremely important aspect of a democracy, and especially for the largest democracy in the world. But what we've seen is that time and again, across different governments, across different states, the way they've decided to deal with protesters and with those critical of the government is exactly the same. And it is to employ this colonial archaic law against them, and call them anti-nationals. So that it has been translated into different things. If you see across the last 10 years, any of the major events that happened in the Indian political life in the last decade would be marked with some kind of protest, would be marked with some kind of outrage by people. But on the state side and in the response of the state, it would be marked by a very similar pattern, which is to use the sedition law against all of these people who were protesting at different points of time. Be it the protests during COVID times, when a lot of people were critical of the way the governments, their respective governments in different states, were dealing with the crisis. Be it after the Pulwama terror attack, when a lot of people again raised questions about the terror attack. People were critical about the handling of national security. Every single time you see these major bubbles of a number of sedition cases being slapped onto dissenters and being slapped onto protesters. So that trend in itself has remained very coherent, even if it's in independent, free, modern India, as it was in a country which was under British rule.
One of the things about the multiple cases filed against journalists recently and politicians was that they were filed in 5 different states, different districts. Now the problem here is that it relates to the exact same offense. So what you have is now these people who must fight the exact allegations in 5 different states, possibly faced arrest warrants in all 5 states. Currently, their arrest has been stayed by the Supreme Court. But I think it's a question of, look at the quantum of harassment that can be done for a tweet that possibly could not have incited violence. And I think this is the problem here, is that a constitutional bench of the Supreme Court has laid down this guideline, and yet we see it not being regarded at all by the police, who are a law-abiding institution and who must take into account Supreme Court judgments on very key laws. Of course, this is not limited just to this case alone. This is a law that affects all of us. It's not a law that only affects, a select group of people. It affects everyone, because the problem with sedition is that it's worded. It can be worded vaguely, and this is not good for any criminal law in any democratic country.
One of the things that the database found was that under the current Modi government in the last 6 years, the number of cases of sedition have increased, significantly, nearly by nearly 30% more. So the average number of cases that would be recorded in times of the Congress government were 30% less than what they are being recorded now. And in fact, 65% of around 11,000 odd people who've been booked for sedition in the last 10 years, 65% of those have been booked in the last 6 years alone. So you see how the ruling party, which is the biggest and the largest party in the world currently, tends to use this law to target again people who are critical, people who might be broadcasting views which are critical of the government, and tends to target them and label them as anti-national by using this colonial archaic sedition law. And all of these are very intrinsic to our freedom of speech and our freedom, to express ourselves in a manner which is non-violent, in a manner which doesn't incite violence. And that is what this particular law sort of stamps upon, and that is particularly what it wants to crush out. This aspect of being able to disagree and being able to criticize your government and be critical of what the government is doing. So it's really important. It's not about only those who've been targeted, but at the very heart of it lies the fact that this is somewhere shrinking the space for all of us to disagree, for all of us to criticize our government, and for all of us to ask accountability from the government that we have chosen and we have elected through our votes. So it's not just about those people. It's not just about the people who are fighting these charges. It's about all of us at this stage.
We at Article 14 are very interested in bringing out for everybody, as we said, were the stories of people who were charged under sedition. Because our focus is not just on those that we may call headline grabbing cases, or people who've been charged who's, like Shashi Tharoor or Rajiv Sardesai, Umar Khalid, many others whose cases have grabbed headlines and are constantly in the news. But our focus is on shining a light on those people whose cases do not find any mention in mainstream media as well. Because one of the things that we now are we should be aware of is the fact that we still have the right to free speech and expression. That hasn't gone away. We still can speak up. We're still an electoral democracy. We can still criticize. And the way in which sedition is being used currently is not the way in which a democracy should be functioning.